The great chamber of the Galactic Council was silent. Ambassador Elena Reeves stood before the curved rows of seats where representatives from 50 different worlds watched her. She could feel their eyes on her. Some looked bored. Others looked amused. None of them looked concerned. Elena took a breath and spoke clearly. Humanity requests that the Vrex Dominion withdraw their fleets from our border systems. We have settlements in those areas. Families live there. We have every right to remain. A low rumble of laughter rolled through the chamber. The sound made Elena's jaw tighten, but she kept her face calm. She had been doing this job for 3 years now. 3 years of being treated like a child asking adults for permission. Warlord Krell rose from his seat. He was massive, nearly 8 feet tall with dark scales that gleamed under the chamber lights. His people, the Vrex, had conquered over 200 worlds. Everyone in the galaxy knew their reputation. The human speaks of rights, Krell said, his voice deep and sharp. Your species has been in space for what? 200 years? We have ruled the stars for 10,000. Those systems are valuable. You will leave them or we will remove you. Elena met his eyes. Those are human colonies. We built them. We live there. We will not abandon our people. Krell's mouth twisted into something like a smile. Then you choose war. You have 72 hours to evacuate. After that, any human ships or stations in those systems will be destroyed. The council members shifted in their seats. A few whispered to each other. Observer Talth, a slender creature with silver skin, tapped notes into a device. Elena knew what they were thinking. This was not new. Every few decades, a young species reached for the stars and thought they could stand against the old powers. Every time they learned they were wrong. Elena looked around the chamber one last time. Then the council will do nothing? You will allow this aggression? The council speaker, an ancient being that looked like living crystal, spoke in a voice like chimes. The Vrex have followed proper procedures. They issued a warning. They gave time for evacuation. If humanity chooses to fight, that is their decision. The council does not interfere in such matters. Elena nodded slowly. She had expected this answer. She turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard the betting start. Council members were wagering on how long humanity would last. She heard numbers, days, hours. Some said minutes. None of them said weeks. Back on the human diplomatic ship, Elena sent her report to Earth. She described the ultimatum. She described the council's response. Then she waited for orders. The reply came 6 hours later. It was short. Just 2 words, stand firm. Elena frowned at the message. She sent another communication. Request clarification. What are our defensive plans? Should we begin evacuation protocols? The response took longer this time. 8 hours. When it came, it was even shorter. Negative. Maintain positions. No evacuation. Elena stared at the screen. Earth Command was not explaining. They were not negotiating. They were not running. They were just waiting. Across the galaxy, Warlord Krell gathered his fleet. 400 warships assembled in the darkness of space. Each one was a weapon of war, built and tested over centuries of conquest. His commanders were experienced. His crews were trained. His victory was certain. Krell walked through the bridge of his flagship. Officers saluted as he passed. He stopped at the main display where the target system glowed in soft blue light. New Atlantis, a human colony with 2 million people. 12 orbital stations, 30 mining operations. Status? Krell asked. His second-in-command stepped forward. All ships ready, Warlord. The human deadline expires in 4 hours. Their ships are still in position. They have not begun evacuation. They appear to be waiting, Krell laughed. Of course they wait. They hope we will change our minds. They hope the council will save them. They are children playing at war. He turned to face his crew. When the time comes, we will teach them what real war looks like. We will be merciful. Quick strikes. Minimal casualties. They will learn to fear the Vrex and they will leave. Observer Talth sat in their small ship outside the council station. They had requested permission to observe the coming battle. The council had approved. This would be educational. A lesson for other young species. Talth's job was to record everything and write a report. Talth had seen this pattern before. Young species always thought they were special. They thought their courage or their determination would matter against overwhelming force. It never did. The old powers had technology. They had experience. They had numbers. The deadline passed. 72 hours came and went. The human ships did not move. The human stations stayed active. Krell gave the order, and the Vrex fleet entered faster than light travel. They would arrive at New Atlantis in 6 hours. Talth adjusted their sensors and prepared to record. This would not take long. Perhaps a day. Maybe less. Another young species would learn their place in the galaxy. Another cautionary tale would be added to the archives. But deep in human space, in command centers hidden on Earth and Mars and Luna, military officers watched their screens with quiet intensity. They had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. Not 50 days. Not 50 months. 50 years. Admiral Chen Wei sat in his chair and waited. Around him, his staff moved with calm efficiency. No panic, no fear. Just focus. They had done everything they could. Now they would see if it was enough. Time until Vrex arrival? Chen asked. 5 hours, 43 minutes, his operations officer replied. Chen nodded. He picked up his coffee and took a sip. It was cold, but he did not care. He kept his eyes on the screen. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity. Something the Council had never seen. Something the Vrex would never forget. Humans did not fight fair. They fought to win. The human transport ship docked at the Calrith research station exactly on schedule. Zixthar waited in the formal greeting chamber, surrounded by 20 senior engineers who would observe the consultation. Everything had been prepared according to proper protocol. The presentation was loaded and ready. Translation devices had been tested. Refreshments appropriate for human biology had been synthesized. The airlock opened and 3 humans walked through. Zixthar immediately noticed how different they were from each other. The Calrith all looked similar, variations on the same insectoid form, selected over generations for optimal engineering traits. But these humans were wildly diverse. The first human was a female with dark hair tied back in what his database called a ponytail. She wore glasses and carried a battered laptop case covered in stickers. Dr. Sarah Chen, she introduced herself, shaking Zixthar's manipulator limb in the human greeting gesture. Quantum physicist, thanks for having us. The second was a tall male with gray streaks in his hair, Marcus Webb, mechanical engineering professor. He looked around the facility with open curiosity, touching surfaces and examining joints with his hands. Zixthar found this behavior strange. Why touch something when sensors could provide better data? The third human made Zixthar pause. He wore stained work clothes and heavy boots. His hands were scarred and calloused. Jake Morrison, the human said with a grin. But everyone calls me Wrench. I fix stuff. Your credentials? Zixthar asked politely. 30 years working on ship engines, station life support, pretty much anything that breaks, Jake said. No fancy degrees, but I've probably taken apart more machines than most people have seen. Zixthar felt confused. Why had the humans sent someone without formal training? But he maintained his composure. Welcome to the Grand Convergence Project. If you will follow me to the presentation hall, we have prepared a comprehensive briefing. The humans followed him through the facility. Sarah took notes on her laptop. Marcus kept stopping to look at equipment. Jake whistled at the size of the wormhole generator. That's a big boy, he commented. The presentation hall was designed to hold 500 Calrith observers. The humans looked tiny in the vast space. Zixthar began the presentation. Slide 1 of 40,000 appeared on the massive screens. 6 hours later, Zixthar reached slide 22,000. He had covered the basic history, fundamental theory, quantum field equations, exotic matter requirements, and the first 3,000 failed attempts. He paused for questions. Sarah raised her hand. This is all fascinating, but could we maybe get a summary? Like, what's the core problem in simple terms? Zixthar felt his antennae twitch with surprise. I am providing the core problem. This is the simplified version of our research. Marcus was rubbing his eyes. How much more is there? 18,000 slides remain, Zixthar said. We have not yet covered attempts 4,000 through 5,000 or the detailed quantum resonance models or the... Right, Jake interrupted. He had been doodling on a piece of paper. Look, buddy, no offense, but we're going to need the shorter version. What breaks and why? Several Calrith engineers made clicking sounds of disapproval. One did not interrupt a formal presentation, but Zixthar tried to be understanding. Humans had shorter attention spans. It was documented in their biology. The wormholes collapse after approximately 3 uses, Zixthar explained. Cascading resonance failures in the quantum field structure cause the space-time tunnel to tear itself apart. Okay, Sarah said, typing notes. And what have you tried? Everything, Zixthar said. We have attempted 17,000 different configurations. We have tested every theoretical model. But what's your basic approach? Marcus asked. What's the underlying philosophy? Zixthar paused. Philosophy? This was engineering, not philosophy. We calculate the optimal quantum field parameters. We build systems to maintain those exact parameters. We control every variable to prevent deviation from the theoretical ideal. You try to control everything? Jake asked. Of course. Precision is essential. The quantum fields must be maintained at exact frequencies, exact energy levels, exact spatial configurations. Any deviation causes instability. The 3 humans looked at each other. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication. Sarah spoke carefully. Chief Engineer, would it be possible to see the actual testing facility? And could we access your raw data? Not just the processed results. The presentation contains all processed data, Zixthar said. Right, but we'd like to see the messy numbers. The stuff before you cleaned it up, Marcus said. Zixthar felt uncertain. The raw data was enormous, unorganized, full of noise and errors. It would take weeks to sort through. That data requires proper context and analysis to understand. We'll manage, Sarah said with a smile. We're used to messy data. Against his better judgment, Zixthar agreed. He assigned them workspace and granted access to the databases. You have 48 hours, he said. Then we expect your preliminary assessment. The humans thanked him and left for their assigned quarters. Zixthar watched them go, feeling doubtful. 48 hours to review 5,000 years of research? Impossible. That evening, Zixthar checked on the humans out of curiosity. He found their workspace in chaos. Papers covered every surface. Multiple screens showed different data streams. Empty food containers were stacked in corners. A strange brown liquid in cups sat everywhere. His translator identified it as coffee. Sarah was arguing with Marcus about quantum uncertainty principles. Marcus was sketching mechanical diagrams on a whiteboard. Jake was examining holographic projections of the wormhole generator, spinning them around and zooming in on different components. This doesn't make sense, Jake was saying. Why do they have 17 redundant stabilizers here? That's going to create feedback loops. Because the math says they need them, Sarah replied, not looking up from her screen. But does it, though? Jake zoomed in further. Look, if you've got this stabilizer fighting with this one and this one trying to compensate for both, he might have a point, Marcus said. Over-engineering can cause more problems than it solves. Zixthar watched, fascinated despite himself. They worked in complete chaos. They interrupted each other constantly. They ate while working, dropping crumbs on sensitive equipment. Jake was drinking something called beer while reviewing quantum field data. It was all completely unprofessional, and yet they were asking questions no Calrith had asked. They were looking at familiar data from unfamiliar angles. Jake, the one without formal training, was pointing out mechanical issues that had been overlooked. Marcus was questioning fundamental design assumptions. Sarah was finding patterns in the noise that had been filtered out as errors. Chief Engineer, one of his assistants called. Should we ask them to work more quietly? They are disturbing other researchers. Zixthar looked at the chaotic workspace one more time. The humans were laughing now, excited about something they had found. It was so different from the quiet, orderly Calreth research labs. No, Zixthar said slowly. Let them work. He returned to his office but found himself unable to focus. The image of the messy human workspace stayed in his mind. For 5,000 years, the Calreth had approached this problem with order, precision, and careful control. Every experiment followed exact protocols. Every calculation was checked and verified. Every deviation was corrected. What if that was the problem? Zixthar pushed the heretical thought away. The Calreth way had built an empire. Order and precision had taken them to the stars. Chaos was inefficient. Chaos was primitive. But chaos, apparently, was how humans solved problems. 20 hours into their 48-hour deadline, the human workspace looked like a disaster zone. Zixthar had sent observers to monitor their progress, but the reports confused him. The humans were not following any recognizable research methodology. They were not documenting their process properly. They kept changing direction, pursuing ideas and then abandoning them, and yet they seemed excited. Sarah had not slept. She sat surrounded by 3 laptops, each running different simulations. Her hair had escaped its ponytail and stuck out in odd directions. She drank her 20th cup of coffee and stared at a quantum field model. "It's here," she muttered. "The pattern is here, I know it." Marcus walked over carrying a stack of printouts. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but he was grinning. "Look at this. I pulled the physical specs for every wormhole generator they've built. Every single one is over-engineered. They're treating this like building a precision watch when they should be thinking like plumbing." "Plumbing?" Sarah looked up. "Yeah. Water pipes don't try to control every molecule. They guide the flow. They flex a little. They have pressure release valves. But the Calreth are trying to control every single quantum fluctuation." Marcus spread out his diagrams. "They've got 17 different stabilization systems, all trying to force the wormhole to behave exactly according to their math." Jake wandered over, eating something from a wrapper. He had been examining the actual hardware for hours, using the holographic projections and sensor data. "It's like they're strangling it," he said. "You ever try to hold water in your fist? Squeeze too hard and it all leaks out. But cup your hands gentle and you can hold plenty." Sarah stared at him. "Say that again." The water thing?" "No, the strangling part." Sarah's eyes went wide. "They're strangling it. They're trying so hard to control the quantum fluctuations that they're creating resistance. The wormhole fights back." Marcus sat down hard in a chair. "Quantum fields are probabilistic by nature. You can't control them perfectly. That's literally what quantum uncertainty means. But the Calreth are trying to eliminate uncertainty," Sarah said, her voice rising with excitement. "They're trying to force quantum fields to behave classically, to follow exact predictable rules. And the universe hates that," Jake added. He did not understand all the physics talk, but he understood machines. "It's like forcing a bearing into a housing that's too small. Yeah, you can hammer it in, but it's going to bind up and fail." Sarah started typing frantically. "What if we stop fighting the uncertainty? What if we work with it instead?" "How?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. "Flexible framework," Sarah said. "Instead of rigid control systems that try to maintain exact parameters, we create adaptive systems. Systems that respond to quantum fluctuations instead of preventing them. Like suspension bridges," Marcus said, catching on. "They're designed to move with the wind. If you made them rigid, they'd snap. But let them flex and they can handle massive forces." Jake nodded. "Every good mechanic knows you need some play in the system. Tolerances that are too tight cause more problems than tolerances that are a little loose." They stared at each other. Could it really be that simple? Had the Calreth been failing for 5,000 years because they were too precise, too controlled, too orderly? Sarah pulled up the Calreth simulation software. "Let me test this. If I modify their model to allow controlled variance instead of trying to eliminate it..." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Marcus and Jake watched over her shoulder. Hours passed. Outside, the Calreth research station began its night cycle, dimming lights to simulate their homeworld's day-night rhythm. "The humans did not notice there," Sarah said finally. "Look at this simulation." The screen showed a wormhole model. Instead of the rigid, perfectly circular opening the Calreth designs always showed, this one seemed to breathe. It expanded slightly, contracted slightly, shifted its quantum frequencies in small ranges. "It looked almost alive. It's stable," Marcus whispered. "Sarah, run it for multiple transits." She did. The simulation ran transit after transit. 5, 10, 20, 50. The wormhole kept adapting, flexing, responding to each transit's quantum disturbances. It never collapsed. "This is just a simulation," Sarah said, but her hands were shaking. "We'd need to test it for real." "The Calreth will never approve it," Marcus said. "This violates everything they believe about engineering." Jake laughed. "Course they won't. They've been doing it their way for 5,000 years. You don't change your mind easy after that long." Sarah saved the simulation and rubbed her eyes. "We need more evidence. More proof. We need to show them why their approach fails and why ours works." They worked through the rest of the night. Sarah built mathematical models. Marcus designed hardware modifications. Jake, using his decades of practical experience, identified which of the Calreth's 17 stabilization systems were actually causing the problems. At 3 a.m. station time, Sarah had a breakthrough. She had been digging through the Calreth's raw data, the unprocessed numbers they normally filtered out as noise. But as she analyzed the noise, she saw patterns. The quantum fluctuations were not random. They had structure. They had rhythm. "Oh my God," she said. "Guys, look at this." Marcus and Jake, both half asleep, came to look at her screen. The quantum fluctuations are not the problem. They're trying to tell us something. They're showing us the natural resonance frequency of the wormhole. Sarah pointed to wave patterns in the data. The Calreth filter this out as errors. But these are not errors. This is the wormhole trying to find its stable state. And they keep forcing it back into their theoretical ideal, Marcus said, suddenly awake again. Which is not the actual ideal, Sarah finished. The math says the wormhole should behave one way. But reality is messier than math. Reality has factors we can't calculate, quantum effects we can't predict. So reality finds its own stable state and the Calreth keep dragging it away from that state. Jake scratched his head. So they're solving the wrong problem. They're trying to make reality match their math instead of making their math match reality. Exactly, Sarah said. They looked at each other in the dim workspace, surrounded by the chaos of their research. Empty cups, scattered papers, equipment blinking with data streams. It was nothing like a proper Calreth laboratory. It was messy and disorganized and chaotic, and they had just solved a 5,000-year-old problem. "We need to present this to Zixthar," Marcus said. "It's 4 a.m, Jake pointed out. "He gave us 48 hours, Sarah said. "We've got 4 hours left. Let's put together a presentation." They worked frantically to organize their findings. Sarah created slides that showed the difference between rigid control and flexible adaptation. Marcus built diagrams of the hardware changes needed. Jake, surprisingly, was good at making their complex ideas simple. As the station's lights brightened to simulate morning, the 3 humans looked at their work. It was rough. It was incomplete. It would horrify the Calreth with its lack of proper documentation and peer review. But it would work. They were certain of it. "Think they'll listen?" Jake asked. "They've been failing for 5,000 years, Marcus said. "At some point you have to be willing to try something different." Sarah saved their presentation and sent a message to Zixthar. 3 words. "We found something." In his office, Zixthar received the message. He had not slept either, worrying about the wormhole problem, the failure of his project, and the strange humans working in chaos. He looked at the message for a long moment, then stood up. It was time to see what chaos had produced. The Calreth leadership chamber was full. Zixthar had assembled not just the project engineers but the High Council members, senior scientists, and representatives from 6 different research institutions. If the humans had actually discovered something, it needed to be witnessed and verified by the Empire's best minds. The 3 humans stood at the front of the chamber, looking small and tired. Sarah held a remote control for the presentation. Marcus had his stack of diagrams. Jake just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking completely relaxed despite being scrutinized by 300 brilliant alien minds. "Thank you for seeing us," Sarah began. "We've reviewed your data and we believe we've identified the core problem." She clicked to the first slide. It showed a simple diagram, a circle being squeezed by multiple arrows. "You're trying to control quantum uncertainty. That's the problem." A ripple of clicking sounds went through the chamber. Several Calreth engineers stood up in protest. One of them, a senior scientist named Velthor, spoke loudly. "Quantum uncertainty is precisely why we must maintain rigid controls. Without perfect precision, the system becomes chaotic. But quantum mechanics is fundamentally uncertain," Sarah said. "That's not a bug. That's a feature. You can't eliminate it. You can only work with it." Marcus stepped forward with his diagrams. "Think about structures in nature. Trees don't stand rigid in the wind, they bend. Bridges that last centuries are designed to flex, not to be perfectly still. You're building your wormholes like rigid structures when you should be building them like suspension bridges." "This is absurd," another Calreth said. "We have 5,000 years of theoretical models that prove your models are wrong," Jake interrupted. Everyone turned to stare at him. He shrugged. "I mean, not wrong, but incomplete. Like, you know how your math says the wormhole should work one way? Well, it don't. So maybe trust what the wormhole is telling you instead of what the math says." The clicking sounds grew louder, more agitated. This was heresy. The Calreth built their entire civilization on mathematical precision. To suggest that observation should override theory was... Wait, Sixthar said, raising a manipulator limb for silence. Continue. Sarah showed her next slide, the quantum fluctuation patterns from the raw data. These are not random errors. This is the wormhole trying to find its natural stable state. Every time it gets close, your control systems force it back to the theoretical ideal, which is not actually stable in real conditions. So you propose we abandon control? Velthor asked skeptically. Allow chaos? Not chaos, Marcus said. Managed flexibility. Adaptive systems that respond to quantum fluctuations instead of fighting them. Let the wormhole find its own equilibrium and just guide it gently. Like cupping water instead of squeezing it, Jake added helpfully. The Calreth looked at each other, mandibles clicking in what the humans were learning to recognize as skeptical discussion. The idea was radical, dangerous. It went against millennia of established scientific practice. Do you have proof? Zixthar asked. Simulations. We do, Sarah said. She pulled up their simulation results. The flexible wormhole model, breathing and adapting, remaining stable through unlimited transits. The chamber erupted in debate. Calreth scientists argued about whether the simulation was valid, whether the assumptions were sound, whether this violated known physics. The discussion went on for 2 hours. The humans stood there answering questions, defending their ideas. Finally, Velthor stood. This is too radical. It requires us to rebuild our entire theoretical framework. Even if your simulation is correct, implementing this would take years of testing, peer review, verification. We cannot simply— I'm hungry, Jake said suddenly. Is there a lunch break? Because it's past noon and I skipped breakfast. Sarah elbowed him, but Zixthar checked the time. The human was right. They had been debating for hours. We will adjourn for 1 hour, he announced. Then we will continue discussion. The Calreth filed out in orderly fashion. The humans headed to the cafeteria, exhausted from their all-nighter and the intense presentation. They grabbed food. The station synthesizer did a reasonable job with human cuisine, and sat at a table. Jake made himself a sandwich and a coffee. Marcus got what passed for pasta. Sarah just wanted more coffee. They ate in tired silence for a few minutes. Think they'll go for it? Marcus asked. They're scared, Sarah said. 5,000 years of doing it one way. Hard to change. Jake was finishing his sandwich and playing with his tablet, pulling up the Calreth holographic display interface. He had been fascinated by their visualization software. This is pretty cool, he said, making shapes appear in the air above the table. Way better than our stuff. Jake, we're trying to have a serious discussion, Sarah said. Yeah. But Jake kept playing with it, pulling up their simulation data, making the wormhole model spin and shift. He added some of the adaptive parameters they had designed, just fooling around. If you do this, he tweaked a setting. And then that, Marcus glanced over. Jake, what are you doing? Just messing around. Look, if you set the adaptive frequency here, Jake moved a slider, watching the simulation respond, and then allow variance in this range. The wormhole in the simulation suddenly stabilized in a way it had not before. It looked perfect, breathing gently, flexing naturally, rock-solid stable. Wait, Marcus said, leaning over. Do that again. Jake repeated his adjustments. The wormhole stabilized again, even better this time. That's neat. Sarah was on her feet now, staring at the holographic display. Jake, do you realize what you just did? Made it work better? You created a fully functional proof of concept. In 20 minutes, while eating a sandwich. Jake looked at the simulation, then at his sandwich, then back at the simulation. Oh, is that good? Marcus started laughing. He laughed so hard he had to sit down. We spent all night on this. You solved the final piece over lunch. Sarah was already recording the parameters, saving the simulation. Her hands shook as she worked. This is it. This is the complete solution. Jake, you beautiful, beautiful man. I just moved some sliders, Jake protested. At the next table, a group of Calreth engineers were eating their own meals. They had noticed the commotion and came over to investigate. One of them looked at the holographic display and froze. What? What is that? The Calreth asked. A stable wormhole, Sarah said. Fully adaptive, self-regulating, it should work indefinitely. More Calreth gathered around. They started examining the simulation, running tests on it with their own devices. Excited clicking filled the cafeteria. Someone ran to get Zixthar. Within minutes, the chief engineer was staring at Jake's lunch break simulation. His antennae were trembling. This is stable. Completely stable? Yeah, Jake said, taking another bite of his sandwich. Just had to let it breathe a little, you know? You created this? During lunch? Sixthar asked. Well, yeah. I mean, we'd done all the hard work already. This was just fiddling with the details. Sixthar looked at the simulation, then at the half-eaten sandwich, then back at the simulation. 5,000 years of research. Thousands of the Empire's finest minds. Mountains of data and theory and failed attempts. And a human mechanic had solved it over lunch while fiddling with the details. Velthor arrived, saw the simulation, and his mandibles fell open. This cannot be. Run full diagnostics, the Calreth engineers did. They ran every test they could think of. They tried to make the simulation fail. They threw extreme conditions at it. The wormhole adapted every time, remained stable every time. It works, Velthor said finally, his voice barely a whisper. By the ancestors, it actually works. The cafeteria had gone completely silent. Every Calreth was staring at the holographic display, at the breathing, living, stable wormhole that should not be possible, but clearly was. We need to test this immediately, Zixthar said. Emergency authorization. Full testing protocol. If this works in practice as it does in simulation, he trailed off. If it worked, everything would change. 5,000 years of failure would end. The dream of instant interstellar travel would become reality. All because 3 humans had worked through the night in chaos, and one of them had solved the final piece while eating lunch. Jake finished his sandwich, completely unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened. So, do we still need to do the afternoon presentation? Because I could really use a nap, Sarah started laughing. Then Marcus. Soon they were both laughing so hard they cried while 300 Calreth watched in confused amazement. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. The testing facility was packed. Every engineer from the Grand Convergence Project was there, along with High Council members, government officials, and scientists from across the Calreth Empire. They had called it an emergency session. 5,000 years of failure might end today. Or it might be just another disappointment. Zixthar stood at the control station, his manipulator limbs trembling slightly. They had worked for 3 days straight to modify the wormhole generator according to the human designs. The 17 rigid control systems had been replaced with adaptive regulators. The precise quantum field emitters had been adjusted to allow controlled variance. Every change went against established Calreth engineering principles. But the simulations worked. Every single simulation showed stable wormholes, so they would test it. The 3 humans stood off to the side, watching. They had offered to help with the modifications, but the Calreth had politely declined. Some things, Zixthar had explained, the Empire needed to do itself. They needed to understand not just that the human solution worked, but how and why it worked. Beginning activation sequence, Zixthar announced. His voice was broadcast throughout the station and to every Calreth world. Billions watched. The wormhole generator hummed to life. Energy flowed through exotic matter conduits. Quantum fields began to form, twisting space-time into the familiar ring shape. The Calreth engineers monitored thousands of data streams ready to shut down at the first sign of instability. But there was no instability. The wormhole opened like a flower blooming. It was beautiful, a perfect circle of twisted space, showing a view of a test chamber on the other side of the station. But unlike every previous attempt, this wormhole seemed to breathe. It expanded slightly, contracted slightly. Its quantum frequencies shifted in small, controlled ranges. It looked alive. Stable, one engineer reported, sounding shocked. All parameters within adaptive ranges, another added. No cascading resonance detected, a third said. Zixthar could hardly believe the readings. Begin transit protocol. Send the first probe. A small robotic probe entered the wormhole. It disappeared from one side and appeared instantly at the other side, 50 kilometers away. 50 kilometers crossed in 0 time. Transit successful. Wormhole remained stable. They sent a second probe, then a third, then a 10th, then a 100th. Each transit was flawless. The wormhole adapted to each disturbance, flexed around each passage, and remained perfectly stable. At transit number 200, Velthor approached Zixthar. The old scientist's mandibles were clicking with emotion. It works. After 5,000 years, it actually works. Continue testing, Zixthar ordered. Transit rate increase. Send multiple probes simultaneously. They did. 5 probes at once, 10-20. The wormhole handled them all, its adaptive systems responding to the increased quantum disturbances, flexing and adjusting, but never collapsing. Transit number 500. Transit number 1000. The wormhole showed no signs of instability. Enough, the High Council's senior member said. This is sufficient proof. The Grand Convergence Project has succeeded. The testing facility erupted in clicking, chittering celebration. Calreth engineers embraced each other. Some were crying. Their species had gender-neutral emotional responses, and the moment was overwhelming. 5,000 years of failure had just ended. Zixthar walked to where the humans stood. Sarah was grinning. Marcus looked satisfied. Jake was eating something from a snack wrapper, watching the celebration with mild interest. How? Zixthar asked simply. How did you solve in days what we could not solve in millennia? Sarah thought about her answer carefully. You were trying to control nature. We learned a long time ago that nature doesn't like being controlled. You have to work with it, not against it. But our mathematics were correct as far as they went, Marcus interjected. But reality is messier than math. There are always factors you can't account for, variables you can't measure. So instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, you build systems that can handle uncertainty. We don't have 5,000 years of, this is how it should work, getting in the way, Jake added. We just looked at what was actually happening and went with that. Zixthar felt something shift in his understanding. The Calreth had been trapped by their own expertise. They knew so much, had such detailed theories, such perfect mathematical models, that they could not see past them. They had been solving the problem as it existed in their theories, not as it existed in reality. There is another factor, Zixthar said slowly. Your approach to problems, you work in chaos, you argue, you try things without proper protocols. You improvise, Sarah finished. Yeah, humans are really good at improvising. We've had to be. Earth wasn't always easy to live on. Nothing ever went according to plan. So we got good at adapting, at finding solutions with whatever we had available. Plus, we're used to being wrong, Marcus said. Human history is full of theories we were absolutely certain about, and then they turned out to be incomplete or just wrong. So we're not too attached to our ideas. If something doesn't work, we try something else. We're messy, Jake said with a shrug. Always have been, but messy can work just fine if you do it right. Zixthar looked around at his fellow Calreth. They were celebrating, but he could see it in their movements. They were shaken. Their entire worldview had been challenged. The precision, the order, the careful control that defined their civilization had failed where human chaos had succeeded. What will you do now? Sarah asked. Rebuild, Zixthar said. Not just the wormhole network. Our approach to science. Our approach to problems. He looked at the 3 humans. We have been the teachers for many species, showing them our methods, our precision, our control. Perhaps we should have been learning from them instead. Over the next 6 months, the Calreth Empire transformed. They built wormhole generators throughout their territory, each one using the adaptive human designs. A network of stable wormholes connected their 400 star systems. Travel that once took months now took seconds, but more than that, they began to change how they worked. Young Calreth engineers started asking stupid questions like Jake had. Researchers began looking at the raw data instead of only processed results. Laboratories became a little messier, a little more chaotic, a little more willing to try unconventional solutions. Zixthar started teaching a new course at the Imperial Academy. Adaptive Engineering Principles. It was controversial. Many older Calreth thought he was corrupting the youth, teaching them to abandon precision and order. But the course was always full, and his students were solving problems that had stumped previous generations. The 3 humans returned to Earth as heroes, though Jake was uncomfortable with the attention. I just moved some sliders, he kept saying, which made Sarah and Marcus laugh every time. A year after the breakthrough, Zixthar invited the humans back to the research station. They met in the cafeteria. the same one where Jake had solved the problem over lunch. This time, Zixthar had brought food for everyone. "I have been practicing human cuisine," he said, carefully setting down plates. "I hope it is acceptable." They ate together, making small talk about their current projects. Sarah was working on new applications for adaptive field theory. Marcus was teaching at MIT, sharing the Calreth collaboration story with his students. Jake had gone back to fixing ship engines but was occasionally called in as a consultant on impossible engineering problems. "I have a question," Zixthar said finally. "Something I have been wondering." "Shoot," Jake said through a mouthful of food. "If you had 5,000 years like we did, would you have failed too? Would you have become trapped by your own expertise?" The humans looked at each other. "Probably," Sarah admitted. "Humans can be pretty stubborn when we think we're right. But hopefully we'd notice we were failing and try something different," Marcus added. "That's kind of our thing, adapting when things don't work." "Maybe the trick is mixing it up," Jake said. "Get people from different backgrounds working together. Someone with all the book learning. Someone with practical experience, someone who doesn't know what they're doing but asks good questions. You get a better answer when you've got different perspectives." Zixthar clicked his mandibles, and what the humans had learned was equivalent to a thoughtful nod. Perhaps that is the real lesson. Not just that flexibility is better than rigidity, but that diversity of thought is better than uniformity. "That's pretty deep for a lunch conversation," Sarah said with a smile. "I learned from the best," Zixthar replied. And the humans weren't entirely sure if he was joking. They finished their meal together, a Calreth engineer and 3 humans, sharing food and conversation. Outside the cafeteria, ships were using the wormhole network, traveling between stars in seconds. The dream of 5,000 years had come true, all because someone had been willing to admit they didn't have all the answers. All because someone had been willing to try something different. All because chaos and order had met, argued, and found a solution together. Jake looked at the empty plate where his sandwich had been. "You know," he said, "this is definitely going to be a story people tell. The time humanity solved an ancient problem over lunch." "They will probably exaggerate it," Zixthar said. "Nah," Jake grinned. "If anything, the truth is weirder than any story we could make up." Marcus raised his coffee cup. To weird truths and lunch break breakthroughs. They clinked cups together, human and alien, celebrating the simple fact that sometimes the best solutions come not from following the rules, but from knowing when to break them, and somewhere in the galaxy, a wormhole breathed and flexed and remained perfectly, impossibly stable, proof that the universe prefers the company of those who don't take themselves too seriously.